Hello, Sanjay. I'm so excited to talk to you today. How are we feeling? How are you feeling today?
Hey Mary, feeling good. I'm looking
Good.
forward to where this discussion takes us.
I know, me too. I was just thinking about it, and every time you've been in the city, I feel like we get like a chance to have some really, really good conversations. And then when you're not here, we don't get to have them. So
Oh,
I was
come
looking
on.
forward to like
That's
having
too
this.
much hype. That's too much gas.
No,
You're
it's
trying to downplay
I'm
the
being
man.
so real. I mean it. I really feel like I miss when you're not here and we don't get like the random little tangent conversations that we get to get into. So I'm hoping we get to do some of that today. Um, but I wanted to start with, and I know we chatted about this a little bit offline, the truth of society piece. If we want to
Mhm.
like jump right in there, I think that would be a good place to start. Um,
Yeah.
I um, I read it over, but I kind of was curious what was like the genesis of this piece. How did it come, and like where is it currently standing today?
For every society, there seems to be uh, some accepted truths that
Hmm.
are just prevalent, throughout its existence. So I was like, well, then let's talk about truth and let's talk about how society arrives at what it considers true. So
Okay.
we iterated quite a few times. There are ideas that, and I can explain it, what the piece is at so far. Okay, so basically the thought is that every society has ideas that they have sort of integrated into their psyche as a truth, and
Mm,
that comes from the bare bones like foundation of society, which I posit is the family, the nuclear family.
mm,
um, what we would consider in the U.S. single family homes. In other countries and other cultures, it's multi generational homes. But here in the U.S., you have your parents, you have the children, um, and for the children, really anything that they consider to be foundational truth for them comes from the parents. So whatever ideas that the parents have, they try to teach or should try to teach their children. Whatever practices that the parents do, they teach their children. And then, through interactions with your neighbors to the left and right of your home to across the street, if the practices or ideas that that family has are considered good and useful and utilitarian, then other people adopt them. And then it spreads, right? It goes from just a small part of the street to the entire neighborhood, and then it goes to the city, it goes to the state, and so on and so forth, until uh, that idea, in some form or state, is eventually adopted by everyone.
mhm.
When the founding fathers wrote the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, well, the Declaration of Independence first, and then the Constitution, they were thinking about some of these self-evident truths, right? Things that are so they seem to be so like central to society and civilization and just our being as human. They must be self-evident. And so when the founding fathers are writing the Declaration of Independence, they write at the very beginning that we hold these truths to be self-evident, right? And for them, some things are just you don't they just exist by the mere fact of existing, right? The human rights, the Bill of Rights, for example, they deem to be foundational to being a human, to being a citizen of any country. And for them, those rights aren't granted by the government or anyone else or even people. Those rights are granted to you by the fact that you exist as a human. Those are God given rights in their mind, or self evident rights, as they put it. So when you get to things that are self evident, I mean, it, they don't just spring out of nowhere, right? Someone had to either put them into words or think about it, debate about it with other people, share them, and then eventually people came around and accepted those ideas.
Mm, mhm.
Uh, so I touch on that as well, and I sort of use that as justification or backing for the idea that, or the thought that there are ideas which become adopted, and they have, those ideas, those customs and traditions have to start at the family level, the small family level.
Mm-hmm.
That's the gist of it. It's obviously we launched back in 23, and it's still not published, so it's been a really hard piece to write about. It touches on a lot of things that people might find like contentious. So Nume is always I mean, Nume is a great editor, so he's always having me think about things that I wouldn't have thought about otherwise. So then
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh man, now I got to sit back and think about it for a few more months, and then eventually, I'll make some more edits and updates, and then it's back and forth. So
Yeah.
hopefully, I'll finish that sometime this year.
Yeah, okay, I hope so too. But it does tackle a lot. Like it's very conceptual and abstract, I feel like to an extent. And actually I'm interested in the fact that I feel like most of our discourse pieces are a little bit more like when I think of discourse, I think of a very concrete thing, like a policy
Mm.
or like something like that that is very like rooted in reality and almost even rooted in like bureaucracy, but this is a very like abstract concept that you're making an argument for. So I feel like that would be super interesting to introduce like into our discourse segment from that framework. I think, well, one of my first questions that springs to mind that I was just kind of curious about through reading it and hearing you talk is your assumption that these fundamental truths are relevant to every society, like universal, or would you say they're more relevant like to each society? Um, like if
I
something
would
that
say
might be a
there,
fundamental truth in America might not be a fundamental truth somewhere else.
yeah, I think that there are fundamental truths to each society, and more likely than not, there will be some things that carry over.
Hmm.
Like don't murder people. It's
Yeah.
a fairly universally held thing. You shouldn't murder, you shouldn't cheat, you shouldn't steal. Those are at a human species level. I think those have become very ingrained in us because throughout the millions of years of our evolution and then the thousands of years of civilization, we came to the understanding that hey, if you lie and cheat and steal and murder, that's that's not going to be good for you or anyone else.
Yeah.
Right? That hurts everyone. That doesn't just hurt you; it hurts the people around you and society at large. So we decided to admonish the people who would do that. We decided to chastise them and uh, shun them.
Because that's counterintuitive to like the principle that you describe
Yes.
as the most important, which is ensuring like your personal survival, but then also the greater survival of the species. So that's like
Yeah.
counterintuitive to that, I guess.
Yes.
Um,
Exactly.
I guess something I also found interesting in your argument was you talk a lot about the importance of being able to articulate these ideas and like that as a mechanism for spreading the ideas. I kind of wanted to talk more about that and just hear how you think about that in the modern day. Like, is your writing and even just writing this piece like an example of how you sort of clarify your ideas and like disseminate this information that you feel that's where you gain information from, or is it in trusted conversations with people, or and what impacts are being had on those mechanisms for spreading these fundamental truths given like the changes in how we communicate today. If you have thoughts on any of that, would love to hear.
Yeah. I think that when it comes to transmitting ideas, I can have great ideas, but as long as they stay locked up in my brain, they're not really going to do too much good because I can have ideas, but for them to do anything, I have to either uh, relay them, communicate them to others, or I have to put it into action. Um, as one single person, I'm limited to how much action I can do. But if I can put my ideas into words or a video or audio like we're doing right now, then it becomes much easier to disseminate those to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also think that ideas are really interesting because they can get stronger and they can evolve if you discuss them with other people, right? You can have an idea and you yourself think it's fabulous, it's the best idea you've ever had, and then you talk to someone else about that idea, and we all have different experiences, we all read different things and understand the world a little bit differently than each other. So when you share and talk about your ideas with other people, then that exposes maybe some, you can add in different elements to it, or it could expose some weaknesses or vulnerabilities in your idea.
Mm-hmm.
And as a thinker, if you are looking to genuinely develop strong ideas, what ends up happening is you say, okay, so Mary, you made points A, B, and C. I understand, and let me see how I can now incorporate those points into my own idea. And then over time, right, you iterate, and that idea becomes a much stronger one because you were open to having conversations with other people and genuinely trying to understand them, which it's reflected a little bit in our discourse as well, the discourse segment, because
Mm-hmm.
the idea there, the way that we approach it is, hey, here's my idea, but here's something that other people also think on the same topic, and here's me saying that, okay, points A, B, and C are very genuine and good points. I can understand where other people may be going with that train of thought.
Yeah. I really like how this model accounts for nuance. I think this might be something that, like, historically I sometimes tend to over-index on is the fact that people's experiences are so vastly different. So it's like sometimes feels overwhelming to search for shared truths in that. But I think I really like this model of like what you're describing, which sounds like you might have your own interpretation of something and then someone else has their interpretation of something, and like the reality is like the real shared truth is probably somewhere in the middle of these two experiences, and like only by communicating about them is like the way we can reach any type of like truly valuable idea, or the most valuable idea, I guess is more accurate.
Yeah.
um this kind of leads me, I guess I would be curious to like explore how this works in a in like a specific setting. And I know one of the topics I feel like we've talked about and that I'm interested in hearing more about from you is I like kind of this idea of how important like the nuclear family is to these concepts that we talk about and that are principles of this like shared truths piece. And I think one of the truths that you sort of assert is that survival and propagation of our species is like a very fundamental important thing. And I feel I feel like some people out there would potentially argue that that's not the main purpose of living, which feels like a pretty fundamental thing to like disagree on. So I was just like I was curious to hear your perspective on how you would kind of go about finding a shared truth between, those two opposing perspectives, and even just your general perspective on that question.
Yeah. If you want, I can say some really clickbaity stuff here, and then we can put
No,
it up
I
on TikTok.
really just, it's a question I don't know the answer to, so
Yeah.
I want to, like, I think it's interesting to talk about. But I understand it can be very complex, so if you're
It
not
is.
like, I want
It's a
to dive
very
into this,
complex
then that's
series
okay.
of conversations, and there's a lot of things in this specific conversation that people will disagree about. Like the whole like dink phenomenon, double income, no kids.
Yeah.
It's a really big thing in the U.S. And some people don't I forget being a couple, right, and having that double income. Some people don't even want to get married.
Hmm.
Some people are more than happy to just be single.
Yeah.
Um, I personally think that's a luxury that we're afforded here in the U.S.
Hmm.
Not because people that are in less socioeconomically fortunate places need a dual income, nothing like that. I think it's because we are so very comfortable and we have access to so many amenities and resources here in the U.S. that we're like, whatever, you know. When I get to the age of retirement, then
Mm.
I'll go live the rest of my life in a retirement community and I'll be fine.
Mhm.
Um, but traditionally, what's happened, and this is everywhere in the world, not just in the U.S. The assumption was that you would have children, and in your old age, your children, right? You take care of your children, they grow up to be adults, and working hard, contributing to society, and then in turn, your children take care of you in your old age.
Mhm.
Um, so I think for the vast majority of human civilization, that's been the trend. That's been what people do. Um, there's if we work on the assumption that you know because I think we do have to work off of a series of assumptions because otherwise there's no forward there's no forward movement to this conversation.
Mhm.
If we assume that someone does get married, heterosexual couple, they have children of their own, then that then becomes the bedrock, the foundation of any given society. And there's plenty of research showing that having a two-parent home, even if it is a home with two mothers or a home with two fathers, it's better for there to be two parents for a number of reasons um, than just one. And then further, this may also be a little bit controversial, but it's better for there to be a mother and a father figure in the household
Hmm.
um, because inherently, mothers and fathers model different behaviors for the children, and then the children sort of it's like you're not sitting them down and saying this is how a man acts and this is how a woman acts. You model that for your children. The way that the parents treat each other is then modeled, and the children will replicate that, right? When we talk about generational trauma and breaking cycles and all those things, that's what we're really talking about. Is we're trying to either emulate or break models that our parents made for us, set for us, because we imbibe those um, unconsciously.
Mhm.
So if our parents are setting or are being a good model for us as adults, then we take that into ourselves. We formulate our own behavior and interaction with other people
And that's
based on how.
the internal, the truth
Yeah, it becomes
comes
internalized.
from. Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah, it's from your parents. That's natural and that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, so what do you think about the conversation around declining birth rates and like the general, like,
Yeah. Again, without getting into too much of the controversial stuff and all the theories and uh, conspiracies, I think playing out right there. There's two options. Eventually, we get to such a low replacement rate among Americans, or I mean, many other countries. Right, most developed countries, I think, face this problem of low fertility rates and people not having children, or if they do, they'll just have one and maybe two at the most. Um, Long term, that plays out, and either you don't have enough people who can contribute and maintain the infrastructure that we've built up in sort of the modern society, the modern world that we've built sort of just collapses because if you can't maintain it, someone has to maintain it, whether it's highways or power plants or um, telecommunications or whatever it may be.
mm-hmm.
All that has to be maintained. Either people realize that hey, this is going to be a problem, and we have to have more kids, right?
Yeah.
Um, or we continue on the same declining route and things go sideways real quick.
Yeah. I'm curious. It's so interesting to me. And I started to realize this as I was like first visiting your Truth to Society piece and then revisiting your Molding Marines piece. Like, I feel like, and then thinking and talking about, like, I feel like you have a lot of thoughts about this, like, the importance of this structure and, like, this, foundation of survival as a species, and that feels like an important, like almost recurring theme. And then I got to your rereading your Molding Marines piece, and I was like really struck by like the thought of how literal like survival was in a sense to you then, and like was so curious, like how do you notice that theme? Is that a weird connection that I'm drawing, or is it something that resonates with you? And like, just how much were you considering your mortality, like when you're training as a Marine, I guess, are my two
Uh,
questions.
yeah, I wasn't really too concerned about my mortality per se.
Mm-hmm.
Not to, it does happen. I think some recruits will get to basic training and you're just overwhelmed, right? I mean, here in the civilian world, we're sort of just, yeah, it's chill, it's whatever, as long as you're not hurting people or, crashing your car into someone else's car, you're all good.
Mm-hmm.
But seemingly at recruit training, you can't do anything right.
Wow.
And there's two, three, four, five men, for at least for the male recruits, and I mean, you're always being watched. Someone's always in your face. There's always yelling happening. You're always put under stress.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone who either isn't mentally ready to adapt to that or hasn't been exposed to any of those sorts of things before, those challenging environments, they will break down. So I'll give you a little quick story. The first week that we met our drill instructors, because the way to do it is, you get off the bus and you get on the yellow footprints. That's the iconic, receiving side of basic training. But then for about a week, you're with a temporary drill instructor, and they're doing all of your paperwork, and you're getting all of your shots, and getting all of your equipment issued, and everything else. And then after the first week, then you finally meet your drill instructors. And whoever's listening, if you're interested, you can go and you can watch senior drill instructor speech on YouTube, and there will be plenty of examples. And that's just an introduction, right? And at the very end of that speech, all hell breaks loose because, the commanding officer says, senior drill instructor, take charge of these recruits and carry out the plan of the day. And the plan of the day every day for 3 months is to wear you out and make you run, make you scream, make you do workouts, constantly putting you under stress.
Yeah.
So we meet our drill instructors the very first day, and end of end of that day, one of the recruits is getting driven away in an ambulance because he just had a nervous breakdown. He couldn't take it. He legitimately thought that one of our drill instructors was going to kill him, and he just
Wow.
completely shut down.
Do you That's so interesting. This was a question that I had for you related to your time in the Marines and like reading about it in depth is I do I have been in not anywhere near as close of or as tough of a situation as that, but I've been in like some working environments that are like high pressure, like in an
Mm-hmm.
office situation, and I feel like even in that setting, that's like, you're not using dangerous weapons and like being physically exhausted. When you're put in really, really tough situations, I feel like human nature becomes exposed in a different way. And I was curious of like your take on like what you noticed, and like I don't know, in some ways it was like really beautiful moments where like if somebody's really like in the trenches with you working on something really hard and you're in a really high pressure situation, you really see like kind people like taking the time to like be helpful, but then you also I felt like would encounter some people that were really like that brought out a really bad side of them, and like they want to be mean and they like want to like take advantage of like some power trip, and like did you experience things like that? um
Yeah. I, I don't know if my experience at basic training was, similar to, if not the same as everyone else's. I'd imagine it would be just law of averages, you know.
Mm.
Uh, but everyone who I talked to after basic training, after I got to my unit, when I got to talking to the guys, the other Marines that had been to combat, I never was on a combat deployment myself. Uh, every single one of them would say that when you're put into that situation where you are being shot at, or you know there's grenades going off around you, you don't know how you'll react, right? Either, I mean, there's stories of the biggest, most jacked dudes that are, you know, that can run 3 miles in 18 minutes and do 20 pull-ups and do all the crunches and lift all the weight. Some of those guys just shut down in those high stress environments. And then the flip side of it is, you know, Joe Schmo from uh, Queens, New York, you know, who never lifted a weight in his life, is the one that keeps his wits around him and is able to, you know, direct the team to return fire and sees the objective. You never know, because that life or death situation is not something that we're exposed to, and there's a little bit of stress inoculation that you can put yourself through, so you're prepared for it. But I mean, when it hits the fan, there's no telling. Um, a lot of Marines, when I was transitioning out, a lot of Marines were like, "Oh, you know, these college kids, they're always complaining about being stressed out, and all you're doing is typing papers, bro." Well, it's not the same kind of stress, you know, but it's still stressful. Um,
Yeah.
right, working in an office and having a deadline and having a crazy project that's coming due, and maybe your teammate didn't, you know, is slacking off and they didn't pull their weight, and now you have to pick up their portion of the work. It's still stressful because, in a sense, that's still sort of survival because
Yeah.
if you don't finish that project on time, or if you don't turn in, you know, the paper to the standards that your professor wants, or you take a test and you just did not study properly, I mean, that's a bad grade. That's you getting fired. That's still
Yeah,
a big
that's
deal.
capitalism, baby. We're all competing in the market for our survival, aren't we?
Yeah, still a big deal. Um,
I think it's also interesting, actually, what you're saying about how different the reactions are in these like life or death situations, and how you never know how you're gonna react. Because it occurred to me earlier when you were talking about um, you know, how the high pressure situation that you're put in, it feels like a lot of like identity erasure. Like you become like a Marine before anything else, right? Like that is like especially if you are a like recruit, you're like that's who you are. That's your identity. It doesn't really matter. And I know you describe in your piece too, just like how how it really doesn't matter like any type of racial differences or background differences, experiential differences. And I was kind of just curious about like how you think this changes and like changes the sense of community that's built there once you have no like almost identity.
yeah, in the drill instructor's eyes, recruits are subhuman. Like you're nothing. You're worthless.
That's so crazy, but doesn't that feel like actually mean?
It does, but it is what it is, right? I touched on it, I think, in one of the phases. Um, recruits have to, right? Whenever you see a drill instructor or a Marine, you have to render them the proper greetings because they're Marines. They made it. They went through boot camp and they did all the training and they went to their units and they're Marines. Civilians, you also have to render them the proper greetings because they're civilians, right? You're aspiring to be a Marine, and who do Marines serve? Your Marines don't serve the government or they don't serve their commanding officer. Marines are serving for the American people. Um, so then you also have to give them the greetings and the respect that they're due as civilians. But as a recruit, you're nothing, right? You're not a Marine. You're not a civilian.
Do you feel like that level of rigor is necessitated by the severity of like what is like the ultimate challenge of somebody that trains for this, which is like being deported into like active combat. I'm assuming is the like
Probably. Yeah,
it's so
I think
rigorous, and that why it requires so much discipline.
I think the idea is that so many people, you get a massive variety of people that come to any basic training, whether it's Marines or Navy or Army or Air Force or Coast Guard, whatever it may be. And now Space Force, I don't know if they have a basic training. You sit at a
I feel like
computer and
it's
do
hard to
stuff.
become an astronaut, actually.
Yeah. So a lot of people come to that environment, and it's a massive challenge, right? When you go to college, you have orientation, and you want to get everyone on the same page about what's expected at a university. When you go to a workplace, it's the same thing. You have orientation, you have onboarding. Um, you want to make sure that you get off on the right foot to understanding whatever the culture may be in that workplace.
Hmm.
For the military, for the Marines, everyone comes in, you know, like I said earlier, Joe Schmo from Queens, New York, and it's, it's Harold from Western Tennessee. It's um, Dakota from Kansas. It's Kyle from Virginia. It's all of these people who come from very, very different backgrounds, from cities, from suburbs, from farms, from the boondocks, everywhere. That variety of experiences is great. It contributes to a lot of great relationships that are built, but also everyone has different expectations. So when you reduce everyone down to the bare minimum to zero, you're level setting, right? You're saying this is where we all start. You are not a recruit, and we're going to build you up from here. We're going to build you up to level one of just being your basically trained Marine. So I think that's the intent. The intent is to erase any sort of baggage that recruits might bring.
How do you feel like that experience, if it did at all, influence the piece that you're working on about diversity?
Hmm.
Like, do you see any parallels there?
Yes, I definitely do. Prior to joining the Marines and finishing basic training and going to my unit, I was pretty rigorously in one camp so far as politics goes. And that's probably because I'd never been exposed to anything else. I hadn't really been exposed to a diversity of ideas. And like we touched on earlier, when you're exposed to different ideas, more than likely your own ideas and perception of the world will evolve a little bit. It'll change. I think that's what happened. Is that things changed a little bit and gained a broader understanding and appreciation. But at the same time, you sort of see a lot of commonalities. That here are a bunch of Marines from very different backgrounds, and yet we all decided to enlist for whatever reason it may have been. We still joined, or enlist or commissioned. So what are the ideas? What are the foundational things that are core to what America stands for? Because then I eventually did realize that those things are core to America. They're, for all intents and purposes, they are America's truths. So without those things, without an immigrant to the country, or even someone who's born and raised here, without ascribing to those beliefs, you probably won't be successful socioeconomically in the U.S. or even just as an American citizen. If you don't have those ideas in the back of your mind, or if you don't frame your perception of the world through that perception, through the American lens, then you'll have a hard time.
Interesting. And like, what are you thinking of it encompassing? And then I think that's kind of one of the last points that I want to touch on. Like, what would you describe as like the American lens?
The American lens, there are those self-evident truths, I think, are very important. That the Bill of Rights, of course, is very important as well. It's all the freedom of speech, of religion, of free press, and of gathering and demonstrating. Um, the importance of being able to protect yourself and defend yourself from tyranny, whether domestic or foreign.
Mm.
All those things that are laid out in the Bill of Rights, of course, those two just being the first two of 10, are very important. The willingness to work hard, to go out there and, I'm not saying, pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of thing, but just being able or willing to go to your job and say, hey, this is my job. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do it well.
Mm.
I think that's very important. A spirit of entrepreneurship, which I think defined America over the past century and a half. I think that spirit of entrepreneurship and hard work, I think, is what made America what it is today. Right, coming out of World War II, America was very well set up to either go back to being an isolationist nation or take the lead as a world power and ensure that peace, for the most part. we I think talking about the wars that we engaged in is out of scope for this, but for the most part, we've managed to keep the peace internationally, and that's because we set ourselves up for success.
Hmm. Okay. I think that's a good point as any to wrap up on. Oh, actually, I have one more question. How do you feel about all of your quotes going viral?
My quotes are going.
Have you been seeing that? On the
Oh, on TikTok.
Tusk Quill TikTok, I think it's all of your like military quotes have been getting the most traction.
Well, maybe that speaks to what the youth want today. Maybe they're looking for something like that.
Have you seen it? Let me tell you how many views it has. I was just looking at this. Do you feel famous?
Well, hopefully they don't know my name. So
I think your name is on it. 700. Oh yeah, there it is. 700,000. 743,000 views, and it's you
yeah,
being quoted saying, "An overly sensitive nature can be a liability in the field. Ultimately, the success of training is tested in the line of duty," etc., etc. 700,000 views and 220,000 likes.
it's impressive.
Isn't that exciting?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that speaks to what the American youth are looking for. Maybe we do need something that tests us.
They want to be pushed into a more rigorous
Yeah.
culture. See, my only question, and then we can wrap it up soon, and like thought around everything that you just said, and I very much agree with like freedom of speech, freedom of identity, like pretty much all of the values, the freedom from tyranny, like all of the values that you listed, I wholeheartedly agree with. And I believe also firmly in the value of contribution. But my only dilemma is, and I know this is going to maybe sound too abstracted, and maybe the answer will just be you're not living in the real world, so like forget it. But like, if there were a way in which I could just exist in this world with no systems and no, you know, confines or preconceived notions, if I was just born into this world and I could exist and just like create art and in like wholeheartedly focus on enjoying my life in whatever capacity that takes on, like maybe that does mean having a family, maybe it doesn't, but just like I don't I do struggle and I sympathize with the I think the newer wave view that maybe would have some opposition to that, of this idea of like maybe like I don't exist just to work. Like I want to contribute meaningfully in a way that's fulfilling, and I feel like that's something the next generation is like really striving for, but like this idea that I exist to have a job, I feel like isn't enough and it shouldn't be enough for people. I think there should be a sense of enjoyment. And I feel like you do a lot of that like with your woodworking and with like other things, and I feel like cultivating that real sense of fulfillment in your life is something that I feel like isn't essential to America, but I feel like it should be. I don't know. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mostly agree. I think that people need something to challenge themselves with.
Mm-hmm.
They need some sort of purpose. Um, I don't think that working should be your purpose. For the majority of people, I don't think that's the case.
Hmm.
Right? We go to work because it pays money,
Yeah.
right? And that I think a lot of oh man, like the early 2000s were like make your passion your job so you'll never work a day in your life. Like what?
So you don't
No,
subscribe to that?
no, I think the two should be very separate things.
Oh.
You know, Tusk Quill is my passion. Woodworking is my passion.
Hmm.
Uh, those are passions. My purpose is different from that. My I go to work not because it's my purpose or my passion. I go to work because it's a job, and it pays me money, which then I can use for goods and services in exchange, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and I mean, a job that challenges you um, intellectually, right? That you find stimulating in that sense, or if you're working a manual labor job, something that is challenging in that sense. Maybe you're creating something and you want to excel and take your craftsmanship to the next level, right?
Hmm.
You can be a drywaller and still do great drywalling, and be a finished carpenter and still do great work.
Yeah.
Pursuing perfection in your trade, I think, is a valuable thing to pursue, right? I think that adds value, but we shouldn't confuse that with everything else in life.
Yeah, there's this greater sense of fulfillment. I feel like that I guess some people might find it in their jobs and some people might not. And that's like the nuance of the human experience. Um I think there's a little bit of a sense of like a rebellious like this rebellious notion. I feel like it has like that sort of title. I feel like which is that we shouldn't have to like if we're entitled to survival as humans, then we're entitled to these goods and services. But I I guess I just think that's not explicitly true because even if we were born into this world under no system, under any government, like no matter what, you have to like do in effect some sort of work in order to survive. And so like in this system, it just happens to be that we have to get these desk jobs for the most part, but um if it wasn't that, then we would be growing our produce and working in that way. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
that's
Yep.
I
There's no such thing as free lunch. You're gonna have to work in one way or another.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
just
I guess
right. That is what it is.
I guess I learned something new today. Well, um, thank you so much for talking to me, and I hope we get to do this again soon. So I want you to work on the Truths of Society piece, and then we can have like our post mortem on that. And I still have other questions I didn't get to, so um, hopefully we'll be repeating this again soon. But thank you, Sanjay.
I look forward to part two of this discussion. Thanks,
Yeah.
Mary.